All right, strap in, because today we're diving deep into a story that'll really grab you.
Oh, yeah, this one's intense.
It's James Carter's 17-day survival ordeal in the Bitterroot Mountains.
You always hear about those wilderness survival stories, but this one,
This one's got it all.
it does.
And we've got the goods to really dig in, a timeline of what happened day by day, a survival guide packed with expert advice, an interview with James's sister, Emily, who went through the whole search and rescue from her side of things.
Can't forget that perspective. The family's going through it too.
Absolutely. Plus, we've got James's own account of what he went through, and then a news report that kind of ties it all together.
That's going to be fascinating, seeing those different viewpoints side by side, because it's not just about the physical challenges, though those were insane.
Oh yeah, the Bitterroots are no joke.
We're going to see how his mental state played a role, his family's reactions, even sheer luck. It all factored in.
The Bitterroot Mountains, I mean, talk about unforgiving beauty. Rugged, isolated, the weather can change in an instant.
And that's what makes these stories so gripping, right? It's that element of the unknown, nature's power.
Absolutely. So picture this. Day one, James sets off on this solo hike. A 3-day loop. He's done it before, knows the area, experienced hiker. But then, bam, this huge storm rolls in.
And that's where what seems like basic prep suddenly becomes life or death.
Exactly.
Did he tell anyone his exact route? The survival guide really hammers that home. Even on trails, you think, things change, conditions change.
Right. Complacency can be deadly out there. The news article says he was due back on Sunday, but there wasn't a specific route shared. Emily, his sister, only knew it was a 3-day hike, one he was familiar with.
Okay, so already there's that gap in information, which makes the search that much harder.
Exactly. Day 2 hits, and James realizes he's way off course. No cell signal, landmarks are all messed up because of the storm, and the mountains all start to look the same.
Easy to get turnaround in that kind of terrain, especially under stress.
Oh, absolutely. Now, the survival guide really stresses having a topographic map and compass, even if you've got a GPS device. Batteries die, signals get lost. Relying solely on technology can be a fatal mistake.
Couldn't agree more. It's that over-reliance on gadgets, thinking it'll always be there to save you. Nature doesn't care about your fancy tech.
Nope, it doesn't. Now, to James's credit, he's resourceful. He starts rationing his food, boiling water from a creek, trying to figure out which way to go. He thinks if he heads towards what he believes is a river, that'll lead him back to civilization. But what he doesn't realize is he's actually going deeper into the wilderness, away from help.
That's a classic mistake people make, thinking downhill means water, water means people. But in those mountains, it can lead you into these isolated valleys, box canyons, places that are even harder to get out of.
Yeah, nature can be a tricky one. So days 3 through 5, it's full-on survival mode. He's building a temporary shelter, trying to fish with what little gear he has left, even attempts to trap some small game, though not successfully.
Tough going, especially if you're not well versed in those wilderness skills.
Oh yeah, and the timeline mentions he's really struggling to keep a fire going because of the constant rain, which in that environment fires everything.
It is. Warmth, purifying water, cooking what little food you can find, signaling for help. Those skills, knowing what plants are safe to eat, those can literally be the difference between life and death.
It's like the mountain are testing him at every turn. You're lost, hungry, exhausted, can't even get a fire going. I can't imagine what that does to you mentally.
It has to be as draining as the physical challenges. That hopelessness starts to creep in, and that affects your decision-making, your ability to problem solve.
It's a downward spiral, and it just keeps getting worse.
Oh, no.
By days 6 through 8, his food is practically gone. He's losing weight fast, having to rely more on foraging, which, if you don't know what you're doing.
Incredibly risky. One wrong berry, one wrong mushroom, and it's game over.
And even if you find the right stuff, it's not exactly a feast. We're talking bare minimum calories to keep going.
This reminds me of that anecdote about foraging mishaps. That classic tale of someone mistaking a poisonous plant for something edible. It always makes the rounds in survival circles.
Oh yeah, those stories where good intentions meet a lack of knowledge. Uncomfortable, but kind of funny in hindsight. But for James, mistakes weren't an option at this point. The stakes were way too high.
It's getting serious.
It is. He even sees aircraft a couple of times, but can't signal them from deep in the forest.
Oh man, that close yet so far away, that has to mess with your head.
And then, things take a turn. A really scary turn.
Uh-oh. What happened?
Day 10, dusk is settling in, and James hears this rustling in the undergrowth. He thinks maybe it's a search team, maybe they're close.
Oh, that glimmer of hope.
But it wasn't a search team, it was a grizzly bear.
Oh, wow. Now that's a whole other level of danger. Those encounters are no joke.
No joke at all. And this is where knowing bear behavior becomes absolutely crucial. The survival guide talks about this, how it's not always aggression that draws them in, but often it's the smell of your stuff. Remember that thing about bears being attracted to toothpaste and gasoline?
Oh, yeah, crazy, right. Their sense of smell is insane, something like 100 times stronger than ours.
It's unbelievable. The timeline says the bear went straight for his backpack, where he kept all his remaining food and gear, just tore right into it. Can you imagine that? Watching your lifeline being destroyed by a predator that could easily crush you.
It's the stuff of nightmares, that feeling of helplessness, knowing you're completely at its mercy.
Total primal fear kicks in. James drops the pack, scrambles up this rocky ledge, avoids a direct fight. The bear tears through everything, his food, his flashlight, extra clothes, everything. He's left with basically his knife and a few meager supplies he had stashed elsewhere.
Wow, that he even survived that encounter is remarkable. Quick thinking under that kind of pressure, understanding bear behavior, even when your heart's probably pounding out of your chest.
It's a testament to our survival instincts, how they can kick in when we need them most. But talk about a turning point. He was already physically drained, but now the loss of his gear, it's this huge blow to his morale.
It's like the wilderness was stripping him bare, testing his will to survive.
It makes you wonder, how do you keep hope alive when the odds are that stacked against you?
Right. What's the thing that keeps you going? What's that spark?
That question, it really hangs over the next few days, days 11 and 12, just brutal for James. Marked by weakness, frustration, no supplies, energy plummeting, dehydration setting in.
Yeah, his body's basically trying to shut down, conserve whatever it has left, survival mode and overdrive.
He's trying, though, gotta give him that. The timeline mentions him still making attempts at new fishing traps, fashioning some kind of weapon for protection. But his body's failing him, man. Yet, in the midst of all that, there's this glimmer. He hears what he believes is a river.
Now, that's a smart move, even in his state, reaching a river that increases your chances of being found exponentially.
Right, like a beacon of hope.
Absolutely. Rivers often lead to settlements, or at least attract more wildlife, which, desperate times.
He can maybe trap something. Yeah, it's this pull towards something, anything, a chance. He starts pushing towards that sound, driven by this newfound purpose. And then, day 13, there's this moment. This moment that could have changed everything.
One of those what ifs. This is where it gets to me, It's almost like fate's playing a cruel joke.
He hears a helicopter. It's unmistakable. He summons every ounce of strength he has left, stumbles into a clearing, waving his arms like crazy. But the helicopter, it flies right past, doesn't see him.
That's so heartbreaking. The despair of that. To be that close, have that hope, and then have it snatched away.
Emily, his sister, in her interview, talked about how agonizing that near miss was for the family. They knew about it from the search efforts, how close they'd come to finding him.
And to think all it would have taken is for the helicopter to veer slightly, look a little to the left, and...
It just shows you how fragile things are. Life, hope, it can all hinge on the smallest things.
just the tiniest shift.
James himself, in his account, said this was his lowest point, both mentally and physically. He was ready to give up. He says, and I'm quoting here, "I felt like that was it, like it was over."
But something inside him didn't quit, that deep down survival instinct, the belief that there's still a chance. It really makes you think about what those reserves are made of. Where does that strength come from?
Yeah, where does it come from? Days 14 through 16 are this blur, according to his account. He's still following that river sound, but it's pure willpower at this point. Hallucinated from dehydration, disoriented, but he keeps moving.
It's like his body's on autopilot, but his mind, his will to live, is what's driving him forward.
And then he stumbles across something that reignites that hope. Footprints. And not animal tracks, human footprints.
Oh, wow, that's huge. A sign that he isn't alone, that civilization might be close. It's incredible how even the smallest thing can become this symbol of hope in those situations.
Like a lifeline. Those footprints lead into a hunting cabin. It's abandoned, but inside there's something more valuable than shelter. A working radio.
That's where the story shifts from tragedy to, well, maybe not triumph just yet, but a chance. It's that moment, that unexpected lifeline appearing. It's almost like something out of a movie.
It is. Day 17, he manages to send out a distress call using that radio. And after 17 agonizing days, lost and alone, rescuers find him, airlift him to safety.
It's a powerful story, isn't it? A real testament to that resilience the human spirit is capable of. Even when faced with unimaginable hardship, there's something inside us that can pull us through.
It's inspiring and terrifying at the same time. Makes you realize what we're truly capable of, both the good and the bad. Now, I want to shift gears a bit. We've got this timeline, this factual account, but let's hear James's own words about what he went through. His account goes deep, especially about the bear encounter. It wasn't just the danger, but the emotional impact of feeling hunted, that utter helplessness.
That's what I find fascinating about these accounts. It's that raw, emotional perspective. It's not just the facts, it's how it felt, how it changed him.
Absolutely. And there's this line that stuck with me where he talks about nature afterward. He sees its beauty, but also this brutal indifference. He says, and I quote, "It strips you down to nothing, forces you to see who you really are. I was just a man, alone, fighting for every breath."
Wow, yeah, that's powerful. You can feel that sense of vulnerability, the awareness of how small we are compared to the forces of nature.
It's humbling.
He also talks about that despair after the helicopter missed him. Ready to give up, had basically accepted his fate. But then that shift, hearing the river, was like this lifeline, this pullback towards life.
It wasn't just survival, it was this conscious choice to keep fighting. That's inspiring, you know? Even if most of us will never be in that situation, that inner drive, that will to live, it's something we can all tap into.
And Emily echoed that in her interview, that James's survival wasn't just luck or skill, it was that willpower. She said he just refused to give up.
It's a powerful testament to the human spirit. That refusal, that stubborn determination, that's what ultimately saved him. Makes you think about what we're capable of when we're backed into a corner. But it also makes you consider the cost, right? This wasn't just a physical ordeal. It was emotional, psychological. James, his family, everyone involved, they were all marked by this experience.
Absolutely. Imagine the roller coaster Emily and her family went through, starting with, oh, he's done this before, he'll be fine, to that mounting fear, clinging to any shred of hope,
Right.
and then that immense relief when they got the news he was found.
It's a whole other side to this story, the ripple effect on the people who love and care for you.
And it highlights that power of connection, the strength we draw from those relationships.
Speaking of different perspectives, the news report we have brings in this survival expert who flat out said most people wouldn't have made it, especially after losing those supplies. They called James's endurance nothing short of incredible.
It is incredible, but it also makes you think willpower alone isn't enough. Preparation, knowledge, those things can tip the scales in your favor.
It brings us back to those survival tips, right? Letting people know your plan, packing the right gear, knowing first aid, navigation. These aren't just abstract ideas. They can literally be lifesavers.
James's story is inspiring, but it's also a cautionary tale. It's this reminder that venturing into the wilderness means respecting its power, being prepared for the unexpected.
Speaking of the unexpected, I got to throw in one of those lighter moments here just to break the tension a bit. Remember the thing about bears being attracted to toothpaste and gasoline?
Oh, yeah.
It makes you realize when you're packing for bear country, you secure everything with a scent, not just your food. You don't want a grizzly sniffing around your tent because it got a whiff of your deodorant or something.
Yeah, good point. And it ties into something the survival guide emphasizes: understanding animal behavior, minimizing your impact on their environment. That's part of being responsible in the wilderness. It's not just about our survival, it's about respecting the ecosystem we're entering.
All right, back to the news report for a bit, getting that objective view of what happened. They highlight James's experience as a hiker, the wrong turn that led him astray, his initial attempts to retrace his steps. It really shows how easily things can go wrong, even when you think you know the terrain.
Experience can be a blessing and a curse, right? Sometimes it gives you confidence, but sometimes it makes you overconfident.
And the article ends with some powerful words from James himself. He says, and I quote, "Never think it won't happen to you, and never, ever underestimate nature."
That's a message we should all carry with us. No matter how experienced we are, how prepared we think we are, nature always has the final say.
It's a humbling thought, but an important one. It really gets you thinking, what would it take to actually survive something like that?
We've talked about the physical skills, the gear, having that know-how, but there's this other layer too, isn't there? This deeper level.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
James's story, it's not just about knowing how to build a fire or find food. It's about the mental toughness, that fortitude to keep going when every part of you is screaming to just quit.
And he wasn't some, superhuman survivalist. He is a regular guy who loved hiking, just like a lot of our listeners.
Right. And that's what makes it so powerful, right? If he can find that strength, maybe we all have it somewhere inside us.
Makes you wonder, what are we truly capable of when we're pushed to our absolute limit?
Exactly. And it's funny, the survival guide talks about the importance of mental resilience, but how do you actually practice that? Like, how do you prepare for that kind of mental challenge?
Right. It's not like you can just go to the gym and lift weights for your mind.
Exactly. But James, he shows us, right? He kept trying to build those traps, fashion a weapon, even when his body was failing. That's resilience in action, pushing through those limits.
It's like that old saying, where there's a will, there's a way. James, he found a way even when it seemed impossible.
It makes you think, And his sister, Emily, she mentioned something interesting in her interview, how after the rescue, after it was all over, James had this newfound appreciation for things we often take for granted: food, warmth, human connection.
Oh, yeah, like the simplest things become the most precious.
It's like staring death in the face made him realize what truly matters.
And that's something we can all take away from this, even if we've never been through an ordeal like his. It's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day grind, the stresses, the to-do lists. But James's story reminds us to slow down, appreciate those simple things, the connections that make life meaningful.
So true, and it kind of circles back to that mental survival kit, right? What tools do we each have to face challenges? Whether it's a literal wilderness or those metaphorical wildernesses life throws at us sometimes.
It's a good question, and I'd love to hear what our listeners think about this. Hit us up on social media. Let us know, what would you pack in that kit, both physically, in terms of skills and knowledge, but also mentally, emotionally? What keeps you going when things get tough?
That's a great point, involving the listeners. For me, I think a big part of my mental kit would be that belief in my own strength, even when things seem impossible, that inner voice that says, keep going, you've got this. And equally important, remembering those connections, the people who support me, who I can lean on when things get tough. It's not just about individual grit, it's about the community that lifts us up.
That's a great point. That sense of belonging, it's like fuel for the soul.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think James Carter's story gives us both a warning and a wellspring of inspiration. It warns us about the power of nature, the need to be prepared for the unexpected, but it also inspires us to tap into our own inner strength, never lose hope, and cherish the good things in life, those everyday miracles we often overlook.
Beautifully said. James's journey is this testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even when faced with immense adversity, survival is possible. It's a story that will definitely stay with me, and I hope it stays with all of you listening too. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and never stop exploring.